Hi everyone, welcome to our session. Today in Totara Learning, we're going to take a look at restricting access to personal learning pathways in Totara Learn. A really long way to say that we're going to look at the restrict access option in the course. My name is Wesley Holden. I'm a product advisor here at Totara Learning, and I'm here to answer questions. You'll also see me in the discussion forums answering questions and things like that. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session and we'll be posting it publicly after, so feel free to ask questions. You'll be using either the chat tool or the Q&A. Either one is fine. If you want to ask a question anonymously or comment anonymously, you can do that through the Q&A. It gives you the option to send a comment anonymously. Discussions and Q&A will continue on the Totara.community site afterwards. If you haven't registered for a free account, please do so. That's a place to get access to coursework and resources and ask questions of other folks that are using Totara. So our objectives for today are fairly straightforward. We're going to review potential restrictions that we can use within Totara Learn in order to set up learning pathways for our users. We talk about learning pathways a fair amount, and there's a couple of different sort of levels you can do them at in Totara. So today we're focusing specifically on the level within a course where we're actually setting a pathway through our content, our resources, and activities. So we'll talk through those potential restrictions. I'm going to demonstrate some of them in action, and we're going to walk through setting some up from scratch, just so you get a good feel for it. Feel free to ask questions as we go. I'm going to go ahead and pop out of my PowerPoint and go ahead and just load up a site. The site that I'm going to be using for today happens to be Totara Learn 12. The things that I'm going to talk about, though, apply to previous versions of Totara as well. Access restrictions have existed for years at this point in multiple releases. And so the one thing that will change from one release to the next is sometimes a new access restriction option has been introduced. So I'll point out where your site might differ from that, from my site. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm just logging into my site as an administrator, and I'm going to go straight to a course page. And what we might do is actually, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new course page because all my other ones already have some activities and resources and things like that in them, but we're going to start from scratch. So this is my course, short name. And one way we can introduce a pathway through content is by choosing a good course format for the content that we're going to be delivering. So when we go into the course settings under format, I'm going to pick the topics format for my particular course because I'm going to introduce 4 different topics to my students. They're going to be kind of separate modules where the learner has to work through each module. When they're done with the quiz in it, then they can move on to the next module. But there are other options that could be helpful for you as well, like the demo format is similar, except it gets rid of topic descriptions and things like that. We also have the weekly format, which can break it up based on time. But for me, I'm going to go with topics format with my 4 sections. And I'm going to go ahead and just save and display my course page. Now, I am going to pop up the demo site real quick because I want to show you something. We have a course on the demo site. I highly recommend going and checking it out, where what we've done is we've added every single possible activity and resource that's commonly used to a course page. And what it demonstrates, aside from the fact that there's lots of activities and resources, is that a course page can get almost unmanageable for learners if you're not careful in the way that you introduce content to it. So I'm just going into my course catalog, and you'll find a course called Course Activities Showcase. And literally what we've done is just go through and add each activity, added a little description of it, and added one so that you could go through and give each one a try. So before access restrictions were introduced to Totara, if you added a piece of content to your course page, it was always there. Anybody who had access to the course could always see it. And here's what would happen. What I'm doing is I'm going through, these are each topic sections underneath of this black bar. And what would happen was we also didn't have these sort of accordion sections. So users would come into their course and they would have this super, super long page of things to go through. Activities, resources, stuff like that. And if you had something at the very top of the page, like a discussion forum that you wanted to go post to ask a question, and if it was right at the top of the page, it was super easy to find. But if, a year ago I took a course and there was this one resource, it was like a PDF that was really helpful and it was somewhere in the course page, trying to come through and find it can be really difficult. Because you can come through, you can't really search for course content. And what I can do is do Control F and then start looking, like if I wanted to find like a lesson activity or something like that. But there's not a great way to go through and find things because there's just honestly so much on the page. So access restrictions were introduced to help limit that, to set it up so that when a learner comes in, they're presented with the right things at the right time. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that that could differ for every learner, and it could differ at that particular time. If I have a course that's an onboarding course, if somebody onboards in January versus someone onboarding in June, those two people are going to be at very different places in my course. So what we used to be able to do was, you would just highlight sort of one topic section and kind of promote it and make it, be the thing that learners would see, which is not super helpful if you don't have all of your learners working through the course at the same time. So access restrictions are going to help us with all of this. So I'm going back to my brand new course that's very empty, and I'm going to turn editing on. And what I'm going to do is just start going through and building content. So I'm going to go add an activity or resource. And the first thing we want to add is an assignment. Actually, let's not do that. Let's start with a resource. So we'll start with maybe a file that we upload. Maybe we want people to read a PowerPoint or look through a PowerPoint, and then they're going to take a quiz on it. So I'll upload my file, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is just going to be presentation, and I'll go and upload my file to it. So drop that in there. And given that this is the first thing in my course, I'm not going to worry about restricting access, but just know that restrict access is a group of settings that are available when you add an activity or resource. So we'll go and add that first item. The next thing, actually, there is a thing we need to do there. Let me go back into presentation, because in order for me to say, okay, when someone's done with the presentation, then they can access the quiz, we have to define what done looks like, right? So we have to say, okay, for this to be considered complete, the learner needs to go and view it. So with a file attachment, there's really only so much you can do with that. The learner goes, they click on it. With a PowerPoint, it automatically downloads locally. Hopefully they open it and read it. That's our assumption. You can also do like PDFs that will open up within the page or things like that, which could be a little bit more helpful for your users. But we now have our presentation. It has completion details. So if I wanted to access that, I could. I'm not going to just yet, though, because next I'm going to go ahead and add the follow-up to it, which is going to be a quiz. So I'll go grab my quiz activity. And I'm going to go down to that restrict access. And let's talk through potential access restrictions. Now we know the one we want is if the person has completed that previous activity, then they get access. But there's some other cool things you can do too. We can say if somebody is a member of an audience, or if they're assigned to an organization, or if they hold a certain position. Now these three are the newest, and I think language actually as well. Those are the newest restrictions that have been added to the system. So if you're on like 9 or before, you may not see those. If you're on 11 and after, you'll see those. Now, and if you want access restrictions you don't have, you'll need to talk to your partner about upgrading to get the release that has that content, or excuse me, that feature in it. So I could come in and say, if you are a member of an audience, like in this case, I have a very generically named dynamic audience, if you're in the audience of, people who are all trainers, then maybe we want to show you this particular version of the quiz. Other things that we could come up with, if you have completed another activity. So that's one we're going to use for this time. So we're going to say, if you have completed presentation, then you're going to get access to the quiz. So we're going to go ahead and just save and return to course so you can see that on the course page. So all we've done is just add our two activities, completion settings for one and restriction settings for the other. So with my quiz, it's not going to be available unless the presentation is marked complete. Now, one thing to note is that right now, my learner will be able to see that this exists. And that can be fine. There may be times where oops, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing there. There may be times where you do want to just let the learner see what they have coming. So in the case of a quiz, that's great to let them see. In order to get to your quiz, you have to click on the presentation. So right now I'm logged in as a learner so I could see their view of this. Now, if I go ahead and click presentation, it's going to download, and I can open it up, I can take a look. One thing to note about it is that the learner still doesn't have access here, and the reason is that this page hasn't been refreshed yet. So when I click on presentation, that will automatically get checked off. When the page refreshes, then I have access to my quiz. So the system, as the learner is going through, is keeping track of what they've worked on to see if something new needs to be unlocked or locked up right then. Now I can go, I can take my quiz. I don't even have any questions or anything in there, so there's not much I can do. And that's the most basic level of access restrictions. Just you can do you can do B after you've completed A. So the next level would be getting into setting up multiple restrictions. So again, maybe we're going to get even more specific with lesson 1 quiz. Let's go back in and we're just going to edit the settings on that again. And we will limit access based on some other things too. You can have multiple restrictions for an item. So we can say you have to view your presentation and you have to do something else. Maybe you're assigned to a particular organization. You know, the IT team has a specific version of a document they need to look at. And so what the system is going to do is go and look at that user's profile and say, oh, well, in this case, their job assignment, and say, oh, you work for information technology, you get to see this thing. And I'll add one more. We could also go based on language. So if we have multiple language versions of activities or resources, you could restrict access unless someone speaks that particular language. So by default with my access restrictions, we can see that it says, okay, view the presentation and be part of the organization and have a certain language set on your profile. We can also adjust this. We could say that the learner does not meet any of these criteria. If they don't meet any of this criteria, then we're going to display the thing. We can also do an any. So you can say, do they meet any of the criteria? Do they meet all of the criteria? So this is where we can get a lot more complex with the rule sets that we build. Now, one thing you might have noticed, these little eyes that sort of kind of disappeared and reappeared for me. These allow us to decide whether the learner is going to see what the thing is restricted for. So if I go through and click all of these and basically turn off visibility, and I'm going to go back to the course page. So here we can see the lesson 1 quiz because I'm an administrator. But if I switch my role to a learner, and hopefully this learner does not meet any of that criteria, we don't even see that the quiz exists. So one area where this could be really helpful is if you have resources that you don't necessarily want someone to see unless maybe they bomb a quiz. They get a really bad grade on it. Or they work for a particular department, so you only want people in a certain department to see a version of an activity or a resource. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you can completely hide it. Now, the difficulty here is that the learner has no idea that they're missing something. So it's up to you to decide. Like in my case with my do the presentation, then the quiz, I want to make sure they know there's a quiz coming. I'm going to switch back to my normal role. And we've got all of our stuff set up here. I'm just going to turn editing back on. So we have the ability to restrict access based on individual activities as well as individual resources. So, for example, I could say, don't let people see that presentation unless they have posted in, one post in a discussion forum or something like that. Another really common one I see is access restrictions to get to a certificate activity. So let's go ahead and add that. I'm going to add an activity called certificate. And this is where I can say you don't get your certificate unless you have met the correct criteria in the course. Oops. So in this case, we might say something like, you have to get an overall grade either on an individual course activity or for the course overall. So in my case, if the person has to get at least a 90% or higher, then we can say, yep, you get access to the course if you meet that grade restriction. And again, this is a helpful one to be able to let the learner see and let them understand why they're not able to access it. Um, but if I don't want to distract people with this and have them, trying to click on it, thinking they should be able to get to it, we can actually hide entire sections too. So if I want to, I could hide topic 2 section. I'm just going to go edit topic. And again, you'll have those same restrict access settings for the overall topic as well. Again, this is super helpful if you maybe have some remediation type resources that you don't want someone to see unless they need them. So we could go down, or I've also seen people add like games or things like that, fun activities that people don't get access to unless they achieve a certain score. I've seen where there will be a glossary, but you can't access it until to add new things to it until you've achieved a grade on like a vocabulary quiz. So there's lots of different options. I know a lot of the ones I'm giving are fairly academic, but a lot of it plays very nicely in the corporate world too. Being able to say, I have this course, it's for onboarding. Every department has a different version of a policy. How do I make it so that everybody can use the same course but gets their own policy? And this is going to be a way to do that. Again, using position or organization or the audience to say, these people see this one. You can also use individual fields from the user profile. So if there are additional fields, you may also have like custom fields you've added. But in my case, if I want to do everybody with a certain email address domain, because we know that all of the UK folks need to access this particular thing. And if we had, this is not a true domain, but if we had totaralearning.co.uk, I could say if people's email address contain that, then maybe they get a different version of the email signature that they're supposed to use. Different stuff like that is very useful. And again, that entire topic section could be hidden so that nobody sees it unless they're supposed to. So you get to go through and decide how complex you want to make it. Another thing, I'm just going to go back into the certificate to show you, is that along with sort of setting up these individual restrictions, you can also set up time since an activity completion. So we can say if it's been 2 days since you failed a quiz, or if it's been so many days since you've posted to a discussion forum, you can have something pop up. Now, the warning I'm going to give you with that is just because the activity pops up and is visible on the course page, that does not mean the learner gets any notification that the thing is now visible to them. So keep that in mind. Actually, I'll give you the other warning with this as well. The other warning I give people when they're setting up access restrictions is if you restrict access to an activity and it's required for course completion, there will be some people that will never be able to complete it, right? Because if I've restricted access and said only people who are speaking or who have English language set up on their user profile can complete this activity, if that activity is required, then all of my Spanish speakers are not going to be able to see it and complete it. So keep in mind that access restrictions and course completion on the same activity can be a little bit tricky. Not course completion, or overall course completion, not just individual activity completion settings. There we go. So we can go through and add that. We can also do restriction sets. So if we want to have more nested logic, we can do that. And it just allows you to kind of dig a little deeper into kind of the same options for that restriction set. You can go in, add more restrictions. So you can get fairly complex with it. Honestly, I don't see a lot of super complex setups. Usually it's, if you haven't gotten a great grade on an activity or haven't completed an activity, then we show you something additional to help you as a resource. We may hide a section of something, like if you complete the pretest and get a fantastic score, we have you skip over some course content and maybe go straight to a final exam, that sort of thing. So you get to choose how you want to make use of these. There's a question, how does the activity restriction affect course completion overall? So activity restriction, it doesn't play with course completion directly. Essentially, like, let me give an example. If I set up 2 versions of a quiz, right? And I say that the quiz is required for course completion. Like, you have to get a passing score on the quiz for course completion. the system wouldn't know which quiz to use for that course completion. And we can't do both, because if I say you have to complete the English version of this to complete the course, and I also say you have to complete the Spanish version of this to complete the course, the system's going to go, oh, well, this learner only completed one quiz, and so they haven't completed the course. So it's basically making sure that if you've restricted access to an activity, that you're very careful if you use it in your course completion settings. So back up to one more piece. So those are the activity restrictions when it comes to individual course completion. You can also actually use it if you are using, not a lot of people are anymore, but using activities and resources on a site front page. You can also do activities and resources like polls and things like that, or documents. You can also use activity restrictions there if you choose to. So if you are using that site front page, a lot of people have switched over to dashboards though, and dashboards don't have those pieces. So those are the big pieces I wanted to talk about today. If there's questions, please feel free to pop them in. I'm just going to pop up my PowerPoint as I have a couple more slides I'm going to walk through for you. But if you have any questions on access restrictions, definitely go ahead and put those in the chat. So if you are ready for more, please visit us at Totara.community. Access restrictions are touched on when it comes to the course creator certification, which is newly released, because it does talk through all of the activities and resources that you can add to a course, and it talks through those restrictions as well. If you need information about the individual restrictions, the in-software help is great, but also you can go to Totara.help and read about those restrictions as well. If you want to play with it, go to demo.totaralearning.com. You can always go and play with that resource course where it has sort of like everything, so you can go and see what it looks like to hide some pieces and restrict access. Then automatically resets. We have a ton of upcoming webinars and events. So we've set up pretty much our webinars through, at least through the end of November. We've got tons of great stuff coming. So from projects like the Best Not-for-Profit Project from 2018 from the Totara Awards, we've also got more software-focused, feature-focused ones like peer recognition and discussion forums and group resource creation and Totara Learn. So please have a look for those. You can sign up for those in the upcoming webinars area on the Totara.community site. We also have some in-person events coming up. We will be setting up the Totara Village at DevLearn at DevLearn in Las Vegas. There we go. That's what I get for reading what's right in front of me. So coming up in October, we're going to be on the show floor in Vegas. So definitely come join us for that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you have a use case that you're trying to figure out with access restrictions, or if you're trying to figure out how to get access to the community or anything like that, please drop me a message. My email address and my Twitter account are right there.